Right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the 2021 Clinton Global Initiative University Annual Meeting. This session briefing is really important. We're talking about going from protest to systemic change. And my name is Natalie Hopkinson. I teach at Howard University, and I'm so sad that we couldn't be on our beautiful campus together, but very grateful that technology is allowing us to be together and talk about these really important issues. So let's get to it. I'm going to read the bios. We have an amazing panel. I will start with Alana Odoms, Executive Director of the ACLU of Louisiana. Alana is a civil rights leader, mother, and a professional in spiritual support to countless activists across Louisiana and beyond. As the first Black woman to lead the ACLU of Louisiana in its 65-year history, she has answered the call to defend the Constitution and the Bill of Rights by challenging systemic racial and gender injustice, vestiges of slavery displayed most prominently in Louisiana's epidemic of mass incarceration, immigration detention, deportation, and racist policing across the state. Thank you so much for joining us, Alana. Next, we have Katrina Ramos. She's the co-founder of Compassion in Oakland. Katrina is founder of this organization, which was created in February of 2021 in response to the rise of Asian American violence afflicting the Oakland community. The impetus began on social media when a friend offered to walk with anyone in Chinatown neighborhood feeling unsafe. And as someone who is passionate about raising awareness for the Asian community, she's offered her support early on. In less than a month, CIO was born, and Ramos now leads the grassroots organizing, having vetted over 1,000 volunteers and onboarded 400. She is a point person for community outreach, development, volunteer operations, among other responsibilities. And given the deluge of community interest, Ramos is helping build capacity and infrastructure and managing their app development team. Welcome. Next, we have Kyle Korver. He is a former NBA player. He was an NBA All-Star with over 17 years of experience in the league. He's one of the best shooters in basketball history. He currently ranks fourth on the league's all-time list of three-pointers made, behind only Ray Allen, Reggie Miller, and Stephen Curry. And it still holds the record for highest three-point percentage in one season. In 2019, Korver documented his experience with white privilege in a personal essay in the Players Tribune, which garnered national recognition and initiated a conversation around systemic racism. His advocacy efforts are put into action through the Kyle Korver Foundation, his charitable organization that utilizes a grassroots approach to enact change. Through this foundation, he has held coat and sock drives. He's funded a building of wheelchair ramps, supported nonprofits such as Helping Hands Rescue Mission and Abide. Welcome, Kyle. And finally on our panel, we have Nalin Pike, an Apache Stronghold member. Nalin is a 21-year-old Chiricahua Apache, and I hope you can help me and make sure that I'm pronouncing this correctly. As a lifelong fighter, she continues to follow the footsteps of her grandfather, the founder of the Apache Stronghold, in protection of the Apache holy sites, sacred sites, and indigenous rights. Pike is the youngest indigenous girl to testify in front of Congress, and today she continues to fight for environmental sustainability and indigenous rights at the local, state, and national levels, battling corporations and political leaders through indigenous spirituality. What an amazing panel. Welcome to all of you. So let's jump into, first we'd like to hear some more about your stories. So Alana, you're currently serving as the first African-American woman to lead the ACLU of Louisiana. Could you talk about a little bit about the work you've been doing to build a more just and equitable future?
Sure, absolutely. And I'll just start by saying I'm really honored to be on this panel with such incredible panelists. I really think that it's really lovely that we are representing such a beautiful, I think, rainbow of Black and Indigenous and women of color. And of course, Kyle, you're wonderful too. But yeah, so the ACLU of Louisiana and my work. I've been in this role for about 3 years, and I have taken the charge of defending the Constitution and Bill of Rights, and really looked at how we can use a lens of racial and gender justice to all of our work. And so we do legislative work, we do litigation, and a lot of our work focuses on how we reduce mass incarceration in the state of Louisiana. For all Louisianians, but particularly for our Black, Latino, Hispanic, Latinx, and Indigenous people. Of course, we have a lot of disparity in the way our state incarcerates people. But we are the most incarcerated state in the nation, both pretrial and post-conviction incarceration. We lead the world in incarceration in Louisiana. And I really believe that the way our laws are fashioned really reflect, they're both vestiges of slavery. We have a very long line of racial segregation in Louisiana, beginning from the founding of our country, but they also reflect the values, I think, about our citizens. And so unless and until we have laws that, you know, respect the human dignity of every human being, in particular women and people of color, I don't think we'll be able to achieve the highest heights that we seek to, that we seek to achieve. And so ending mass incarceration, ending immigrant detention, looking at our laws and making reproductive rights and women's health care a big priority. We do a lot of work there, making the judicial system more fair and making sure that people get a speedy and fair trial. And then looking at the epidemic of police brutality. The ACLU has taken a very specific, focused approach to ending police brutality and qualified immunity in the state of Louisiana by deciding to file hundreds and hundreds of Section 1983 actions, which are cases that look to hold police officers accountable when they violate people's constitutional rights. So all across the spectrum, we are, I believe, standing in the gap and making strides towards creating a more equitable city, state, and country.
Wonderful. Kyle, I'd like to direct this question to you next. So the Milwaukee Bucks took part in a 3-day boycott in protest of Jacob Blake's shooting in Kenosha, Wisconsin back in August. How did the team come to the decision to boycott, and what were some of the reactions to that action?
Yeah, well, first, let me also just say, as someone who has many privileges, getting to share this platform with you ladies is up there. So thank you for allowing me to participate. Yeah, I think, yeah, it would take some time to describe all the events leading up to that moment and all the emotions that were going on in our locker room. But ultimately we found ourselves in this position with 12 or 13 minutes left on the clock, where a couple of my teammates decided that they didn't feel like they could play that game. Between everything that was going on in the country and then the Jacob Blake shooting that had happened in Kenosha, which is about 30 minutes outside of Milwaukee, we just weren't in a great headspace to play. And there was this moment where it's like, okay, I think our hearts are telling us that the right thing to do is to try to make a stand right now, and to try to use this platform that we have. But this feels like a really big moment and a kind of a weighty moment. But ultimately we had great guys on this team. They were in this for the right reason. And they just, I was following their lead, and ultimately we decided not to play. We did not know at the time that Orlando was going to, forfeit the game with us. We didn't know that the other teams in the NBA were going to join us, that the other sports leagues across the country were going to join us. We just felt like right there in that moment for our team, this was the right thing to do. Ultimately, because more people joined in, it kind of became a moment where the conversation in the sport world, it was kind of re-centered, which is one of our fears going into the bubble, is that the actual play of the game would take away from the conversations that were happening. It was a moment in time. I think I just applaud my teammates for following their hearts, and ultimately me as a white man, I'm just trying to follow their lead. And we had, like I said, we had great leadership on our team.
That's wonderful. Kaylin, the Native experiences are not always part of the discussions about race in America. Do you think it's important to understand Native stories and history in the fight for racial justice today?
Yeah, I think that, starting off with the story and the protection of Oak Flat, there's a lot of that goes back from the beginning where Alana had said the foundation of this country was built off of systemic racism. And that goes from the first time the settlers stepped onto North America, where, they talk about this American dream. And through this American dream, was the nightmare that my people had to live. And that was because genocide was brought upon our people. However, these stories were taught down for generations to generations, where my ancestors and in our culture and our way of life is through oral history. So, how we learn our culture and our spirituality and what that means as Indigenous people is passed down through our Native stories. And when we are not told those stories, then our spirit goes along with it. I think that it's really important that in this discussion, that me being able to be a part of this panel is a first step to a lot of change that does need to happen within this country. When it comes to the fight for Oak Flat, we had a foreign mining company called Resolution Copper, who's from Australia and the United Kingdom, and they want to do the largest copper mine in North America. By doing that, it's causing block cave mine. That block cave mine will cause a 2-mile wide estimated crater as deep as the Eiffel Tower. So these stories that I talk about that our people have taught to us, the medicine plants, the food, the water, our ceremonial grounds, and where our ancestors were buried at will be completely destroyed. However, these stories are not told to the American people because we have always been the shadow underneath the carpet. It takes a lot of courage for people to want to hear the harsh truth, because the United States government tends to not want to take accountability and see that truth of what they've done to our people, that first chapter of the United States government. And I think seeing that as a young person from my grandfather fighting, and it's kind of been a generational fight where it's passed down. And I see that today where a lot has changed from the 1400s to where we are at now, at least being able to come up with these conversations and put action to that. And so it's really an honor.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. Katrina, your organization, Compassion Oakland, was formed in response to the anti-Asian attacks that we've been seeing. And what role does compassion play in fostering a more caring, safe, and just society?
Yeah, I want to say thank you so much for inviting me to speak on this panel as well. Like you said, there has been a huge uprise in the attacks on the Asian and Asian American community during the time of this pandemic and even before that. When I think about compassion, I think about a saying that my dad would always say to me, and that's sakit mo, sakit ko in Tagalog. And that means that your pain is my pain, and we face that pain together. And compassion means that as a community, we stand together in solidarity with other members of our community and with other marginalized groups. True compassion comes from acknowledgement and understanding of the different experiences that all our groups have faced. And through that, we're able to focus on building trust and investing in others. And if we demand that our communities are all fully resourced, then everyone can thrive.
Thank you. So next, I have a few questions specifically about racial justice. So Alana, looking back on the attacks on the US Capitol on January 6th, many of us noticed that their response was quite different. The legal response was quite different, compared to when the Black Lives Matter protesters, were in the city. The way that they were treated was completely different. How do you situate this in the wider context of the work that you do?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked this question, because I think many people really understood, especially people of color, understood the juxtaposition and the way that protesters were treated, whereas Black Lives Matter's protesters were met with tear gas and violence and weapons, and white supremacist protesters were ushered in many instances into the Capitol to harm people. But this has to be looked at through a historical context. And what I was also thinking about as this was happening, as I was watching this unfold in the seat of our national government, I thought about a situation almost identical that happened in Louisiana in 1873, which was during Reconstruction, and it's called the Colfax Massacre. And what happened in the Colfax Massacre was almost exactly identical to what happened on January 6th. There was a contested election for the Louisiana governor, and back then Republicans were the Democratic Party that we understand today. And there were a group of white militias, white supremacists, many members of the Ku Klux Klan and other white supremacist organizations, who decided that they wanted to contest this election. And they were going to fire cannons onto the courthouse, which was the seat of government. And in many ways, I think it's so important for us as Americans, and as I listen to my Indigenous sisters speak about understanding history and understanding our culture, in the African tradition, we have a word called Sankofa, and it means you must go back in order to go forward. So in order to gain hope and power and imagination about what the world could be like, you actually have to go back to your history and understand where you were. And recognizing that on Easter Sunday in 1873 in Grant Parish, Louisiana, we were exactly the same place that we were on January 6th in Washington, D.C., we have to recognize that this could happen again. And it's not that it could happen again. It will likely happen again if we continue to allow the insidious ways that racism, structural racism, violence, and white supremacy continue to operate. And we have to recognize that white supremacy in all of its forms happens and harms marginalized people across the board. So if I don't see myself in my Indigenous sisters, if I don't see myself in the Asian and Asian American populations, if I don't see myself in folks who are incarcerated, and if I don't see myself in folks who are struggling for health access and economic justice, that is the whole plan, is for us to stay in silos and for us to be ignorant of our history and our cultural relationships. And so my view around how we ensure that this doesn't happen again is we got to get in deep relationship with one another. We have to dissolve the barriers that exist between us, but we also have to let Indigenous people and Black people and women lead. We can't use this as a moment. We have to use this as a movement.
Absolutely. And you know, I'm wondering, going to Kyle, you know, what are the role for white people, you know, in this movement? So you've written before about being a white man you're a racial minority in the workplace, and but you're playing for mostly white audiences. How do you think that this position has shaped your feeling about your place in this, you know, in speaking to some of these issues?
Well, I think just there's unfortunately, when you bring up a word like white privilege, a term like privilege, there's you know, if any of these women right now they're amazing listening to them talk, right? For some reason, if they were to talk white privilege with white people, white people just kind of shut down. It's like really sad, right? But for some reason, for me as a white man, as a white basketball player, I have this maybe a small a window to be able to speak up, and maybe it's listened to a little bit differently. And so I think my role in this is there's a whole lot of these kind of beginner level conversations, honestly, kind of these like racism 101 questions, Black Lives Matter, all lives matter, white privilege. These are spaces that I can walk into. Because I have access to maybe some conversations that other people don't. And so I think for me as a white man, what is my role? My role is to address this in my own life first, and then to have these conversations with other white folk who maybe won't listen to someone else, even if they're way more qualified and experienced than I am. So I think that's been my heart in this. It's just like, where are these conversations that I can have, and how am I walking into them?
Okay, so thank you for that. So we're going to go back to Nalin, as the youngest, one of the youngest people at this conference, and you got your start at 13. Being an activist in your community. And could you just talk a little bit about, like, do you feel like there's a groundswell among your peers to be, are they engaged and inspired? Like, what is the mood, do you think?
Yeah, I think that, people ask me, Melon, when did you first started fighting? I always tell the people that as Indigenous people, we started fighting when we take our first breath, because we were not meant to be here. Our people were meant to be extinct by the United States government. But because they failed at the extinction of our people, when I took my first breath out of the womb is when I began to fight. And I think that resonates with a lot of our young people that are Indigenous and that are in color, because we live in a world where we have to fight for our lives and fight to have our story be told and accepted in this society. And I think that what is so strong about our young people today is that they're not confined to social and political norms that adults and our elders are confined to. And that's because they don't see the difference. They accept the uniqueness of our peoples and of all people. And I think that if we just hold and grasp onto that kind of strength and just imagine the better world we live in today. Indigenous people have always been the dust underneath the carpet, the shadows of this country. However, how can we fix the first chapter? How can we fix the United States government and make change, positive change for all people of color, if we can't even recognize the first chapter? And that goes through with so many different sacred sites that are being desecrated. Our spirituality, our way of life are all being destroyed by systemic racism. And to me, it's a sense of survival. How can we not be able to pray and have an equal opportunity to clean air, clean water, and the freedom of religion if our religion is not equal to anyone else in this country? So to Native people, it's about all of humanity. And we do not see the barriers because we're trying to protect Nuggle Sun, the earth, and all of humankind. And that pushes a passion within inside me and in my family, because I think about the future of the yet to be born and what world are we going to bring them into. And I think that's what young people have such an advantage, is that they understand that they have to pave that path, because we're going to be left with the fight. And I think that, for Native people and the issues that we fight today, it's really about life and death, because this is where we come from. This is our ancestral homelands. This is where our spirit is entwined to the roots of our people. And when we don't have those roots, when we have extraction and corporate entities and political leaders take that away through broken promises and systemic racism, then our spirit goes along with it. So it's about survival of our people. And that's why we have to fight so hard.
That is so powerful, talking about the first chapter, and, thank you for that. And, also this image of the dust under the carpet, so I'm going to you, Katrina, next. The same might be said about the anti-Asian, that these are things that have been dusted under the carpet. And so this is this spate of anti-Asian violence has really drawn attention to these issues. And what do you think, what can we do to continue to elevate these issues and make sure that they become addressed?
Yeah, I think the first step to being an ally is to listen to these stories and educate yourself. Also, I think it's really important to acknowledge that the Asian and Asian American experience in this country is completely different from the experience for the Black community, for the Indigenous community, for all other communities of color, and just educating yourself on that, so that you really empower yourself to speak up. And when you speak up, you can condemn the attacks on these different communities and on the Asian Americans, and amplify and uplift voices cross-racially. And that's super important, to have that solidarity within our communities, because like Alana said, it's not just one group's fight. It's happening to all of us, and it's happening to our community, and we need to stand up together and really combat the racist attacks that are happening. I think it's also super important to be a active bystander. If you see or hear someone being mistreated, or you see a situation that doesn't seem right, don't be afraid to step in case you see the situation escalating, and don't be afraid to call for help if you need it. Holla Back has a really great bystander intervention training that I've attended, and that really helped me empower myself. And I think the last thing that you can really do is talk about the issues happening. Talk to your family, talk to your friends, social media. Just, know that as young people, we have a voice, and it's our responsibility to use it.
Great. Well, we have about 6 minutes left. I wish we had longer. But for this last round, I'd love to hear from everybody, in about 2 minutes or less, probably on the less side. Change is happening across the country, but there's so much work that has to be done. And how do each of you stay positive and keep motivated and maintain your drive to make a difference when sometimes it's hard to see the end in sight? So go back to you, start with you, Alana.
So I like to think about one of my legal heroes, and Brian Stevenson says something that I say all the time, which is, hopelessness is the enemy of justice. And so we have to jealously guard our hope. So I think about the practices that I need to do to keep myself hopeful. Being involved with young people is one of those ways that I think we replenish ourselves. At least it's the way I replenish myself, because young people have so much hope and are the real change makers and folks who can bring about, I think, radical change. And they've got beautiful imagination and aren't really bogged down by the things that we are. And then love, frankly, centering love. And I'll read you something. And I want the students to know about this book. It's called Emergent Strategies. I'll put it up here so you can see, written by Adrienne Marie Brown. But it says, if love were the central practice of a new generation of organizers and spiritual leaders, it would have a massive impact on what was considered organizing. If the goal was to increase the love rather than winning or dominating a constant opponent, I think we could actually imagine liberation from constant oppression. We would understand that the strength of our movement is in the strength of our relationships, which could only be measured by their depth. Scaling up would mean going deeper, being more vulnerable and more empathetic. And so I think when we get tired, if we can be more empathetic, if we can go deeper, if we can try to love a little bit more, then that's the way to go.
Thank you. Kyle, how about you? How do you stay positive?
A couple of years back, I listened to an activist who was speaking about this, and she said that, you don't need to focus so much on showing people to the light, just be the light. And I thought that was amazing, because I can waste so much energy trying to steer people, look into the light, here it is, this is truth. And it's exhausting because some people don't want to see it. And that's really sad. But if you just live in a way that is light, that is love, that is accepting, that is hearing people and seeing people, it's amazing what happens. And it's the way you want to live, right? That's who we ultimately want to be in this world. And so I think I've held on to that. It's we could talk on that for a while, but just not focusing so much on steering people to understanding, but just being that in your own world and in your own circles has been really empowering for me.
Great. Nalin, how about you?
I think that when I think about positive and the future, I think that's what really gives me energy, is that me being the eldest granddaughter of 27 grandchildren, my younger cousins and my sisters are my passion. They're my motivation to keep fighting. And I think that if everyone finds a motivation, or you know, as a young Indigenous woman, I think that when I wear my moccasins and my traditional clothing, or I'm on panels just like this, I'm reminded of how resilient my people were and how hard they fought for me to exist today and to be able to know who I am and my identity and where I come from. And that within that passion, and I believe that every young person has a warrior within inside them. And when they feel that passion and that fire lit inside their heart, to grasp onto that and to always remember that you have a support system and that young people today are rising. And so that gives me hope, the hope for tomorrow, the hope for the fight, and the hope for unity for all people together. And so what I do, and what a lot of people in this country do, is fighting for the people. And so that's my passion, and that's my motivation. And I think that through the love of my family and seeing my grandfather fight for me to be able to be here today, pushes me to fight for my future children and the yet to be born.
Beautiful. Katrina, you get the last word. How do you stay motivated to, you know, sustain the fight ahead?
Yeah, it's no, community organizing is no easy feat. But I think Stacey Abrams said it best when she was speaking on the panel yesterday, that, you know, voting, community organizing, volunteering, all these things are not going to be the cure to systemic racism, but they are the medicine. And every time we do these little fights and put our best foot forward, we are doing our part in making this world a better place. And it's not going to happen overnight, but the more we take our medicine, the better we'll get. And we're just one step closer.
And sleep. That helps.
Definitely.
Natalie, you're muted.
Thank you so much. Alana Odoms, Kyle Corver, Nolan Pike, and Katrina Ramos, thank you so much for sharing your stories and for the work that you do. Thank you. So we're going to break briefly.
Thank you.
We'll break briefly with a video from one of our sponsors, IBM, and then we're going to move on to the second panel, which is building effective social movements.
There is no planet B. Clean water is growing scarce. Food production is wasteful. Resources are less sustainable. Not a single one of us can escape climate change. Not a single one of us can fix it. But working together, our ideas get bolder. Our solutions are stronger. Our impact is bigger. This is the Call for Code Global Challenge. Join a community of 400,000 developers and innovators. Build your skills on open source technology and fight the effects of climate change. You could win $200,000 and have your solution deployed to communities in need by IBM, the Linux Foundation, and a global network of partners. There's only one planet Earth, but countless ways to help save it. Together, we can answer the call.
Hi.
Hello, and we're back to the Clinton Global Initiative University, and we are part 2 of the plenary session, From Protest to Systemic Change. And very excited about our panelists today. So I will read your bios. So Amika.
Hi.
Hi, Amika George. Amika is a student activist and founder of Free Periods. She's a 21-year-old student at Cambridge University who at the age of 17 started the Free Periods campaign to end period poverty in the UK. After reading about children missing school as they were unable to afford menstrual products, Amika started an online movement, organized a protest in London, attended by over 2,000 young people. She also launched a legal campaign. And in 2019, her campaign successfully persuaded the UK government to provide free menstrual products in all English schools and colleges from 2020. She has received global attention for her campaigning work, including receiving a Goalkeepers Campaign Awards by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in conjunction with the United Nations. And she was listed by Time Magazine as one of the 25 most influential teenagers in the world. She's launched the next phase of Free Periods campaigning to ensure that every child worldwide has access to education uninhibited by their period and working to destigmatize menstruation and eradicate the taboo around periods. And her book, Make It Happen, How to Be an Activist, was published by HarperCollins in January of 2021. Congratulations and welcome, Amika.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm so honored.
And next we have Anya. Is it Anya or Anye?
Anya. Hi.
Anya. Welcome, Anya Dillard, an activist and founder of the Next Gen Come Up. Anya Dillard is a 17-year-old activist, philanthropist, performing artist, and entrepreneur, content creator, and an aspiring filmmaker. She's also the founder of the Next Gen Come Up, an organization that encourages youth to explore activism, pursue community service, and raise awareness through creativity. She's best known for co-organizing the largest civil rights protest in the first ever Juneteenth celebration in her town's history. Anya has been featured in the Washington Post, as well as Elle, 17, and Glamour magazine for her extensive human rights and philanthropic work. The past year alone, Anya has received the 2021 Human Rights Awards from the Conversationalists, the NJACSC Student of the Year Award, and the Black Girls Rock Social Justice Grant. She's spoken at several schools across the US and the UK, and as a creative change agent, Anya believes in utilizing art to disrupt narratives and create safe spaces for marginalized groups of people. Welcome.
Thank you.
And our final panelist that I'll introduce is Zuleika Patel. And could you tell me if I've pronounced your name?
Good day. Yes, you have.
Okay, Zuleika Patel. Zuleika, she is a social justice and anti-racism activist who began her activism at the age of 13 in 2016 when she co-founded the hashtag Stop Racism at Pretoria Girls High movement, which gained global awareness by gaining over 150,000 tweets. The movement at the time advocated for the wider decolonization of basic education in South Africa, and at just 13, Zuleika was named on the BBC's 100 Women list of 2016 as the most influential woman in the world, becoming the youngest South African woman listed. Her efforts have been recognized by the African-American music artist Solange Knowles and on social media, as well as struggle stalwarts Ahmed Kathrad, Sophie De Bruyn, and the annual keynote address held by Ahmad Kathrada Foundation, where she gave a speech on Black women empowerment. Her efforts were further recognized by Professor Angela Davis at the annual Steve Biko Memorial Lecture at UNISA in 2016. And we can go on and on. This is amazing. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So we'll start with you, Zuleika. At 13 years old, you led this demonstration to call attention to racism at your school and this very racist anti-Black hair policy. How did you come to the decision to demonstrate at such a young age?
You know, the decision to demonstrate at that tender age came from the conditions of the country, because I'm a firm believer that activists are produced by the conditions of the republic, and the conditions of South Africa are still we in a stage in our country where there's still a lot of racial tensions, and we have not reached a stage whereby we can say South Africa and her people are free, because the country cannot be free if its people are not free. And so the decision to demonstrate came from the conditions which I and my peers at the time were unable to breathe under. And so because we could not continue to sit idle in these conditions of where our bodies as young Black girls were policed, and essentially our presence in this institution was policed, and we knew that we were not the only ones who were experiencing this. It was not just us, it was Black children across the country experiencing this in schools, particularly historically white only schools. And so the decision came from the conditions we were subjected to, which we were no longer able to live under anymore, and we wanted to bring about change immediately.
Amazing. George, when you were still a student and you started the Free Period campaign in the UK, what inspired you to champion this particular cause? And what were some of the challenges that you faced as you pursued this?
Yeah, so I started the Free Periods campaign and movement at the age of 17 in 2017 after reading about children in the UK being unable to afford menstrual products, which meant that they often had to miss over a week of school every month just because of period poverty. And I'd never actually suffered from it myself, but I was really outraged to hear that it was an issue. I was almost even more outraged to hear that even though it was getting a lot of media attention, there was still no political response in the form of a solution. A lot of our politicians were condemning it and saying that it's really wrong that period poverty was happening in the UK, right in this country, which we consider kind of a prosperous country where there's no such thing as poverty. This was real evidence that girls were missing school, and poverty is very real and really affecting thousands of people across the country. But what really outraged me was the fact that there was no solution. So I decided to start the Free Periods movement online, and it started as a social media movement, and very quickly it was really gaining momentum, and a lot of people were joining on and raising their voices, and that's why we decided to hold a real life protest at the end of 2017, which was attended by over 2,000 young people in London. We then transitioned to a legal campaign, and eventually 2 years later the government heard our cries for change, and they actually made the change by providing free menstrual products in all English schools and colleges, which was a huge victory. In terms of the challenges that I faced, I'd say that the main one was generally as a young person, young woman of colour, in a very kind of white political atmosphere. I wasn't always taken seriously. I think that's something that young people particularly have to deal with quite a lot. We haven't really been framed in public culture as political actors. And so when you do try to make a difference, when you try to start a campaign or a movement, quite often you are marginalized or sidelined, and that can definitely affect your own self-confidence. And that's something I struggled with quite a lot, until I actually realized that it is so arbitrary, the fact that we've kind of trusted the kind of older generation solely to make decisions about future generations, when actually we're here right now. You know, I always think young people aren't the future, they're actually the present. We're all here right now. And I think this panel is real evidence of the fact that we care about politics, we care about social issues, and we're going to make noise about the things that we care about. And I think the future of activism has to be intergenerational, and young people do really need to be taken seriously.
Absolutely. So the next question I have is for Anya. So very similarly, you also leaned in and started your organization, the Next Gen Come Up, to spark conversation. And so you're using dialogue a lot. And could you just talk a little bit about what the role of dialogue is in laying the foundation for effective social movements? And what are some of the things that you've learned from the conversations that you've had?
Absolutely. One of the major things that I've had to realize is the importance of conversations and the real power that conversations play in making people comfortable with discussing what needs to be changed. And I think that especially, we don't realize how important it is to bring politics to the table, whether it be between our family members, between our friends, in our schools. And I think that Gen Zers especially have had to become so accustomed to being the bold ones, starting those hard conversations. And that was something that I had to learn as an advocate. And I had to become comfortable with sometimes being the only person that is comfortable enough to express my political opinion. And in a lot of the schools that I've mentored and spoken at, one of the main pieces of advice that I tell young kids to take away is that you have to have that level of confidence. You have to be okay with having an opinion and understand that your voice has power, because those conversations are what close the knowledge gaps between generations, between racial groups, between gender groups. And that's what really opens the floor up to diplomacy. And that's what is the most important part of creating peace. So I definitely think that dialogue has a huge part to play in, not only people accepting that change needs to happen, but understanding different perspectives and being able to say, I may not agree with you, but I can sit across the aisle and understand how your perspective plays into the issue that we're both, passionate about or that we're both debating. So I definitely think that dialogue is one of the most important parts of becoming open to social change and closing knowledge gaps between generations.
Great. All right. So the next question is for Zuleika. What do you think that it takes for a social movement to be successful and for historically marginalized voices to be heard? And has your approach to achieving change, has it shifted at all in the past 5 years that you've really been active?
Okay, I'm gonna begin with the first part of the question. Firstly, what I believe it really takes in order for social movements to be successful is the most important thing is commitment to ending injustice. That's central to everything, commitment. And then the second important thing is unity and utilizing collective power on the ground, because how we were successful in 2016 in bringing about a change in policy as well as an inquiry into the cases of racism was we did it united. Hashtag Pretoria High School for Girls would not have been known globally if it was only just Zuleika Patel and not all the Black girls of Pretoria High School for Girls at the time coming together. And so we as young people, I truly believe our social justice movements for change are only going to be successful when we come together to form one united voice against injustice. And then the second part to the question is what do I think needs to how do I think historically oppressed voices should be heard? I believe that in order for historically oppressed voices to be heard, it has to be centered around those voices, and those voices can only be heard because I do not believe that people are voiceless. People are made deliberately voiceless by systems of oppression and exploitation, but people have voices, and it begins with them, and it goes back to the ideology of Black consciousness as well as Black power, whereby it encourages the oppressed to not sit idle in their oppression, and actually make a change, and take that decision to resist and speak for themselves. So it's something that begins internally with you, and I feel that if historically oppressed voices center themselves in not sitting idle in their oppression and exploitation, then their voices will be heard, because no one else can make a change for you but yourself, and we are the only ones that are going to liberate ourselves from the oppression we still face in the world. And then the last part to the question: has my approach changed since 2016? It has slightly changed, whereby I believe that there has to be partnership between um, between young people and the generation that's currently dominating decision making positions, because I believe that activism our activism is only going to be effective when it is intergenerational. Governments have to be committed to working with young people in the civil society sector, and that's the only way that our activism is going to be effective. So my approach has changed, whereby it's not just only centered around young people only, but I'm committed to having an intergenerational approach and engaging with other members who aren't necessarily part of my generation, being the Gen Z.
Thank you. So Amika, so she's talking, Zuleika's talking about the different strategies she's used and how they've changed. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what strategies you've used, and were some strategies more successful than others in your campaigns?
Definitely, I think a lot of activism has to be about adaptation. It has to be about working out what's going to work in different communities, how you can really get your cause out there. I think the kind of global pandemic and lockdown situation for so many countries has really forced us to reevaluate how activism can be expressed and how we can use our power as individuals to make social change. And I think for me, social media has been an absolute save in that respect, because we have no sense of real community. We can't protest in the same way that we used to be able to. We can't gather and organize. So social media has given people a voice through Instagram, through Twitter, and platforms like that. We can actually raise our voice about issues that we might not know about. But I think more than that, we've also recognized the urgency of campaigning and activism right now, when I think we have a real opportunity in the post-pandemic world. I think there's a conversation about going back to normal and what the new normal looks like. And I feel very passionately that we can't have a world that looks exactly like it looked like before. Everything that's happened over the last year, I think it's around the anniversary of the pandemic, especially in the UK, and when our first lockdown was called, this last year has really demonstrated just how much needs to change, and just how much inequality and injustice there is in our society. And I think we need to all kind of change our mindset as we go into the new world, and really see it as an opportunity to create something quite radically different from what we had before. And as I said, I think that really needs to include young people in the political sphere. Activism as not something that's really glamorized or held up as a full-time job. It can actually just be something that you do on the side, and something that everyone can do. And I've written this book called Make It Happen, which is all about why young people should be activists. And it's a real kind of practical toolkit for why, no matter who you are, where you live, how old you are, what you look like, what your race or gender are, you really can be an activist. And it can be small micro changes in your local communities. It doesn't have to be a huge global campaign. So I think that's something that really needs to be prioritized as we go into the new world.
Yeah, I think, it's a really great point about, local movements and sort of starting where you are. Anya, I wanted to ask you about the big movement of last year, which was the murder of George Floyd. And, this was part of the new normal that Amika is talking about. And why do you believe that why do you think this one struck a chord with the public so much? And what can we do to make it sustained? What can we do to sustain the energy?
Absolutely. I think that one of the aspects of the George Floyd wave of protest that was so fascinating was that it was unlike anything we'd ever seen. And so were the circumstances we were all living in, right? So we were in the middle of quarantine. We've maybe been 2 months globally stuck at home since, quarantine began. And being that the George Floyd protests began after, his video went viral, I think that a lot of people, because they were at home, because we were stuck to our TVs, to our phones, to our computers, a lot of people were forced to accept that reality. We're forced to realize the prevalence of police brutality, the prevalence of blatant racism in our law enforcement. And I think that before, while it was on, headlines, while it was in the news, while it was on the tip of everyone's tongue, it was still easy for people to ignore. It was still easy for people to plead ignorance to. And I think that that was what was different about the 2020 age of protests, was that we couldn't say that we didn't realize that this was a problem anymore. People could no longer plead that ignorance. And I think it also helped to humanize Black Lives Matter in a way that hadn't been done before, despite the amount of deaths that Black Lives Matter has advocated for that are children, that are Black children that haven't even reached puberty in many cases. And while that should be humanizing enough, we hadn't seen that same sympathy. So I think that, you know, being that we were in such a virtual time, that exposure really forced people to take a closer look at America and to take a closer look at what the real issue was, especially people outside of the Black community. I think that one of the things that will help to keep the progress that's being made by these George Floyd protests and by the wave of Black Lives Matter advocacy that we've seen since the summer of 2020 is involving our elected officials and not being so complacent when it comes to representation in our government and our leadership. Because a lot of the time when we see representation in higher offices, when we see people of color, when we see LGBTQI+ people, we think that that's all we need. We think that the representation is enough, when really we have to recognize that's just one part of pushing the needle. We have to then see ourselves in those places and be able to hold our elected officials accountable and say, okay, you're at this point. Now these are the changes we want to see. This is what we want to see progress in our communities. And I think that the more that people begin to lump in the art of protest and the, you know, decisions that politicians make all need to come into harmony and understand that you know, protest is not used as a weapon. It's used as a mode of communication. It's used as a mode of networking with the people who do make the decisions. And when the people do incorporate, you know, civilians and teachers and students and, you know, into those political decisions is when you see real progress made. And when you see, you know, that, like I mentioned before, that closing of the gap of knowledge between our elected officials and between our young people. And that's a part of, you know, sustaining that social change that really needs to be maintained in order for, you know, the efforts of these protests to not go for granted. So.
Absolutely. So we have about 5 minutes left, unfortunately, but this question is for all of three of you. You know, what a beautiful, it's just such a beautiful, my screen is so beautiful. You know, just looking at you from all different parts of the world and involved in activism at such a young age. What is it about your generation, or is there something about your generation that, you know, that's sort of unique in your approach to activism? That's part one of the question. And how will you measure your success as your campaigns continue to develop? So if we want to start with, well, whoever wants to start can start.
Should I begin?
Sure.
Okay, I think what is unique with our generation currently is that we have this unique fearlessness whereby we've completely refused to accept exploitation and to accept a continuation of exploitation. And so our generation has realized the urgency to bring about change, not just for ourselves, but for those that are going to come after us, for the generations that are going to come after us. And I believe that how we will measure our success is seeing a better world for those that are going to come after us. And for example, girls that will come after our generation won't have to sit and have discussions around whether or not they will be able to access sanitary products for free or not, or be able to access free education or not. And so I believe that that's how we will measure our success, in ensuring that the generation that comes after our generation does not have to sit and have the same discussions we were having about injustices that we faced.
Amika, anything you would add about what is unique about your generation and what you bring to this movement, and how you will judge your success?
Yeah, I completely agree with what was just said. I think I would add that I don't actually, maybe I disagree, but I don't actually think there's anything inherently different about our generation. I think if you look at history, I study history at university, and there's a whole there's centuries of social movements and activism and young people standing up for change. I think the thing that's different about right now and the world in this moment is that there are so many issues. In my mind, the biggest ones are the climate crisis, racism, structural racism, and gender inequality. And it seems like they're getting worse and worse, and it seems like they're getting completely ignored by the people who are supposed to be fixing them. And that's kind of meant that it's fallen to young people almost out of urgency and out of desperation to make that change. And that's the thing that I find very empowering, because it's given young people the agency to enact that social change. But it's also quite terrifying that it has fallen to someone like Greta Thunberg to become a pioneer for the climate crisis movement. It shouldn't have to be a young girl. It should be a politician. It should be someone who doesn't have a million, pieces of homework to juggle on the side. So I think, again, as we go into the post-pandemic world, we need to reevaluate why youth activism is where it is at right now, and we need to stop thinking that there's something unique about this generation, other than the fact that actually we have no other choice but to be activists today.
Great. So the last word is for Anya. What would you say is about your what can you add about your generation, and how will you measure your success? And we've got about a minute left.
Sure. I agree with what Amika was saying about, in terms of being rebellious, there isn't much that's special about our generation alone, but something that I do think is unique is that we walk in our individuality so much. And there's a fearlessness that comes with that. And we are so much more willing to be vulnerable, willing to put ourselves out there for the sake of our future children and for the sake of other people. And I think that that is something that makes our generation truly resilient and truly strong. And I think that the fact that we are the ones realizing that we don't want the same problems to face our children. We don't want the same problems to even exist in the social sphere of the world. And I think that, that's why so many of us push ourselves to be socially and politically aware, and push ourselves to even be in the activism space. And that's something that inspires me every day to continue the work that I'm doing, because I know that the more people who are willing to have conversations about politics, and the younger that demographic gets, the more progress that we'll see earlier on in the times that we're living in. So I definitely think that our generation is made completely of powerhouse people, of creatives, of innovative young people. And I think that that's something that is truly invaluable.
Well, thank you so much, Amika George, Anya Dillard, Zuleika Patel. Remember those names. We'll continue to follow your amazing careers. Thank you for your work. Thank you for speaking on this panel. And thank you to CGI, Howard, and the sponsors for curating this space. And thank you for joining us.